Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Turning Trial Users into Successful Customers, and it's with Revenera and our guest from TechSmith. So I'm your host, Louise Stebbings. I work in marketing here at Revenera. And before I introduce you to our speakers, a little bit of housekeeping just to make sure you can enjoy the webinar properly. I'm just sending you a little thumbs up, thumbs down symbol onto your screen now. If you can hear me and see everything okay, please just press the green thumbs up symbol, and then I know that you're okay and you're on board. And while you're doing that, I'll let you know as well that you can move the screens, the boxes around on your screen, minimize, maximize the slide area, whatever you want to do. Today's webinar will last for about 30 minutes. And if you have any questions as we're going through, pop them into the questions box and we'll do our best to get to those as we can throughout the webinar and at the end as well. Just so you know, some webinars, some networks cause the slides to advance a little more slowly than others. So we recommend logging off your VPN if you're noticing an issue like that. If you do notice that what we're saying is a little slow or it seems out of sync with any slides that we're showing, press F5 on your keyboard and that should bring everything back up to speed again. And then finally, for any other problems you might experience, any technical problems, there's a question mark symbol at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, there's a technical FAQ there. So you'll receive a copy of this recording within the next 48 hours as well. So if you're taking notes or if you want to watch anything again, you can do that. That's no problem. So our speakers today are TechSmith Snagit Strategy Lead Daniel Foster and Vic DeMarines, who's VP of Product Management for Software Monetization here at Revenera. And Dan and Vic will be discussing experimenting with data-driven onboarding to boost customer experience during trials and to drive business outcomes. And your moderator for today's webinar is Michael Goff. He's Principal Product Marketing here at Revenera. So with that, I will say over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Louise. So welcome, everybody. I'm very excited for everyone to be here today, and especially to have Daniel with us on board. This is something a little bit different. It's not going to be your typical webinar. We're going to make very little use of slides, I think. It's really meant to be more of a conversation. As Louise mentioned, if you have questions as we talk, certainly put those into the Q&A box and we'll see what we can do. But again, the whole point of this is turning trial users into successful customers, right? So the focus is on how do you get successful customers. First, you have to turn users into customers. So Daniel, maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about, what's the culture of testing and experimentation like at TechSmith?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, just, if folks aren't familiar with the products, Snagit, Camtasia are the most known TechSmith products. We've been in business for, over 30 years and started out in freeware actually as our model. And but for years and years, we've had a trial model. And so trial is great. 30-day trial is pretty typical for our products. And I work a lot with Snagit, which has basically a 15-day trial, plus you can extend it to get 15 more. So there's a lot of room for experimentation. A lot of things we do or had historically done in marketing happen before the download. So, this kind of ad versus that kind of ad, optimizing the funnel. One of the areas that I really coveted being able to experiment more was, how do we do things during the trial? And, the only surface is not just inside the product, right? Because we send emails. So when you start a trial, you're going to get like kind of a drip nurture series to help you identify different functionality and use cases that should connect with you. So that was already going and had been for years. But what happened in the trial was pretty locked in, right? And it's tough to run an experiment when you can only push a new version of it every time you release an update to the product, which might be years ago, it was like 6 months sometimes between, versions or updates. Now we do it a lot more frequently, but still it's not that really, quick speed to have experimentation that you want. And so one of the things that we've been able to do through having the usage analytics is use that, especially with reach out. So the reach out functionality within Revenera to be able to push messages into the product and have those appear to users while they're using Snagit during the trial specifically. And because we can make those intelligently, contingent on something about you or how you're using the product, we can tailor that and we can do faster experimentation to sort of try some messages and see if we can deflect usage and ultimately deflect or increase conversion. And that's simply by helping people connect with that value more quickly.
Yep. So, when you're talking about sending specific messages to specific people, that's obviously based on segmentation, based on thresholds they've reached in usage or other things. Vic, now may actually be a good time for you just to level set for everybody and give a quick overview of what software usage analytics is all about.
Yeah, so just a quick introduction. So Daniel mentioned, for example, reach out. Really, that's functionality. It's in-app messaging functionality, and that might be pretty familiar to almost everyone when you go to a website. You see certainly a lot of this in-app experience, but when we talk about on-premise applications, much more difficult to do. So really, the usage intelligence platform includes the key functionality of tracking the key events within your application, really peeling the onion to try to understand in an anonymous way how people are interacting with the application, what features are being used, what aren't being used, certain meta information about those features that you want to collect, so you as the developer, the software producer, can have a better experience and obviously deliver the right value to that end user. And reach out, or the in-app messaging, is just, how do I act on that data now? Once I learn how these features are being adopted, how do I change the behavior or make that experience better? And having sort of what you see on websites and SaaS applications with maybe too much messaging, but having that in-app messaging delivered within the context of someone using an application that they're getting value is certainly key, certainly a really important thing.
Thanks, Vic. So, Daniel, obviously at the heart of this, it's improving the customer experience. You guys have done some really good experiments with user onboarding. How important is it during the onboarding process to shorten that time to value, so you make sure that you're improving the experience for trial users?
So, I've talked about this concept a little bit to a few different audiences. Some audiences are people who are actually making the content that are helping to make their customers successful, right? And one of the analogies I've used is this visual of a bridge. And when I started working, I moved from marketing over to product and working with our engineers over the years at TechSmith. And when I made that transition, one of the things I just wanted to keep kind of evangelizing and telling them is, you can ship features, but unless someone has connected with the value of those features, right, and the use cases around them, you've built half a bridge. And it's just as useful as half a bridge, because you haven't actually delivered the promise of the product to them. And so the idea of time to value is not unique to me. I borrowed this from other people, but it is really this, and I kind of drew this very simple graph, but it's saying, over the time of, let's say, a trial period, how quickly can you kind of connect people with the things that the product can do for them, so that you move them above the line where, there's some threshold where they're like, okay, this is going to do it for me, right? I'm going to adopt this. Maybe I start even using the trial, like, invest some time. Maybe it's invest in actually purchasing a license. Either way, there's an investment, right? So how do you move people more quickly through there? The long game, and I kind of made this, as the green line here, this top line is like, how do you keep leveling up? So it's not just, how do I move you above the line a little faster, but over time, as you adopt, as I retain you, as you continue to find value, you'll be exposed to new use cases and new functionality, and kind of continue to grow. So that's the overall concept.
Yep. And I know that, you've identified what you call jobs to be done to sort of help move people along through that trial process. How did you identify what those jobs to be done should be? Was it guesswork, or were you doing something else to really hone in on where you're going to deliver the most value to customers and trial users?
Yeah, so just to make sure we're all on the same page about what jobs to be done are, because this term gets used a lot, and frankly, like, there are people that debate and argue about how to use it, and I'm just like, whatever. The part that's most useful, I think, is just this concept that your potential customers are there to hire your product to do something for them. Some people get, very like esoteric about, like, your intentions and what it ultimately does for you in your life. It's like, okay, maybe, but in the moment, you're like here to try this product, or maybe evaluate adopting this product because you have something you're trying to get done, right? Something you're trying to accomplish. So honestly, when we started this process, I didn't want to assume, because our product Snagit is very horizontal. It's adopted by people in every role imaginable across every industry. And so it felt really overwhelming. So one of the sources that we actually went to was reviews. And G2 Crowd has a lot of reviews. There are other sites you can get reviews. But the point was, how do we see how people, what do they say when they're asked the question just organically, what business value are you driving from this product? What are you wanting it to do for you? And so we collected up a lot of those sort of organic reviews, categorized them, and what we ultimately came up with was a list, kind of a refined list. And I won't go through all the details of the process of refining it. Feel free to, grab my contact info and ask me if someone's really interested in that. But we took those myriad things that people said they were trying to do, and we boiled it down to like this list of 9. So one of the things we actually started doing was presenting that to a new trial user as a form when they started the trial, and saying, if you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish in Snagit, in exchange, we will help provide some onboarding, some coaching that will get you connected with that as quickly as possible. And then, just not to get super technical, but this lives in a database, the response to that lives in a database that gets queried by our product through Revenera, and then pulled in as a value, as a custom property, if you're familiar with usage analytics, that we can then use to target and focus our messages. So if somebody says, for example, I'm trying to create documentation or technical guides, well, then certain features are super important for you and other features can wait. It's fine if you discover that later, but it's probably not hour one, day one. So we've been able to really focus that introduction of the product around what job they're trying to accomplish.
Daniel, so this is a pretty cool process. I guess, and I'm familiar with Snagit and Camtasia as well, and there's certainly a business to consumer aspect to it, but there's also business to business. I'm just trying to think, how does this translate to maybe a computer-aided design product or a more scientific application? And I guess it could translate. It's when you do the jobs to be done, you just got to aggregate to a point, right? And even a very complex product.
Yeah, and I think a product that has a pretty homogeneous user base, it's going to be different, right? It's not like all over the map. It might be 2 levels or something. You might have one lens you could think about might be, are you a power user of CAD software in general, or are you new to CAD software? Right. And so if I need to introduce you to CAD software and a lot of the concepts of CAD software, that's going to be a different set of tasks than if I just need to introduce you to our flavor of CAD software and some of the specific things. So, yeah, I think it's going to vary, and evolve over time. Like, we are now evaluating, like, okay, this has been really useful as one lens. If we were to ask another question or try to collect one more data point, what would it be? Would it be industry is most valuable, or would it be your level of familiarity with Snagit would be most valuable? And then how would we actually use that to tailor your experience?
So to your database and to the responses, so if you see a user on a particular use case, they're doing, like you said, the tech guide, and the usage analytics will certainly, so you can use those as custom properties to segment the data. And if you see that they're not hitting functionality, do you then, hey, that's an opportunity to guide them a bit more, or, hey, it's in disagreement to what you wanted to do. The fact that you're not seeing this new capability added. Do you go to that level in terms of guiding them, I guess, or messaging them?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of try to have these guiding principles, because it's always a challenge to know, like, how much is too much, how pushy can you be, and because you're ultimately trying to help the user, but sometimes it doesn't feel like help, right? I mean, we all remember Whippy, and it's sort of just a tired, like, whipping boy, but it's like that was not helpful for a lot of people. But these are some of the principles we try to keep in mind here. We want it to be, whatever we're doing, we want it to be relevant. It's better to be focused on a few things rather than a lot of things. And how do we make it timely? So we do some filtering to say, you fall into this segment and you have not already discovered that feature. Therefore, we'll show you this prompt.
Okay.
If you've already discovered that feature, we might not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Versus like going to a car dealer website where as soon as you hit the homepage, there's 15 things popping up on you. We want, you know what I mean? Where it's, noisy.
Yeah.
Well, and I do think it's interesting, Daniel, that you guys started with sort of anecdotal, subjective feedback that you were gathering from those review sites. So I think that's actually a really smart way of honing down your list and then pulling it into the application, presenting it, and then measuring it. But so from that list of jobs to be done, what are some of the things you've learned in terms of improving the customer experience and its impact on the trial conversions?
Yeah, so one of the refinement steps that we took was actually, partly it was to validate that list of jobs to be done and make sure that there were some differences between them. Because if most of them were really the same in how you use the product, then, let's not treat them differently. So we did use usage analytics there because we were able to pull reports and say, look at what features, if someone said their job to be done was, I'm making marketing content, how does their usage of the product differ than someone who says, I'm using it to make technical documentation, for example, right? And so there's a lot of things that are going to be the same. There's kind of this like 60% or something that's like, pretty much the same. But then as you move out from that, you start to find some differentiation, right? Where, they push, they bring in content in different ways into Snagit. Some of the editing tools they use are going to be a little bit different. They're going to be more likely to use this one than average. And they're going to share the content to somewhat different destinations because, they're in marketing. Some of the stuff is intuitive. Some things were a surprise to us. And we learned, that people making training content were definitely using the video functionality in Snagit more. And so that's really helpful because we kind of have these big, it's an image editor. It's also a simple video creator, and you can make GIFs, right? So which of those should we talk to you about first? So yeah, that has helped us. Like if you say that you're in kind of this training space, we need to kind of make sure that you're aware of this whole set of functionality around video creation. Yeah. And a lot of that came through those proof points of seeing, people actually do use the product differently depending on which segment they fall into.
Yeah.
Another lens we applied that's outside of the usage analytics is preference. And we did that through surveying. So I like to say that, analytics tells you what, it doesn't always tell you why, right? And that's just true of any analytics you have. It's like it's describing what's happening, but often you're like having to fill in the gaps about why. And so we have usage analytics of our web content to know, people really like to watch video a lot or whatever. But we didn't just assume that was true. We actually went and surveyed customers and said, when you start to use a new technology, whether it's ours or whether it's another piece of new technology, what formats, where do you go first? And so this was some of the research on that. And honestly, video is just super dominant as the most helpful format that people go to. And often where do they find it? They actually go to Google. So they start with Google, whatever your question is. What comes up is a lot of results. Many of them are, embedded video clips, and that's how they connect. So knowing that helped us then say, all right, we know kind of what the topics are that we want to try to get in front of people, and what is the format of that content that we should prefer. So if we have a video about that topic, let's show them that because that seems to really align with people's preference for how they want to ingest the content.
So Daniel, we were talking about
our tools are tools for making videos and visual content. So it also is like good. We can show off how we're using our own tools to our customers too.
Yeah, we were talking about that a little bit and how powerful YouTube was, and certainly as working for multiple product companies, we have our YouTube content, and I'm sure TechSmith pushes out their content. But do you actually have programs where you get other parties, evangelists, product power users to promote them to put their own out there? Because I think people want to hear also from additional users, their peers. Is that something that you had done as well?
Yeah, we are. Some of that has just happened organically over the years. We've never discouraged it. Sometimes people are like, am I allowed? And I'm like, yeah, please, do more. And then, so we've been loose with like, if you're using our interface, it's not like we're going to come after you or so, people kind of have that fear. And then I think more recently we've been proactively reaching out to people who kind of already have a following or some influence in a space and say, you're already talking about our product. How could we make this more efficient and for you and kind of support you in doing that? And I think there is a lot of credibility. I will also say one of the interesting findings is, I'm a former marketer. That was where I started. People tend to trust content that comes from the user assistance or the customer education is kind of a buzzword people are using now, but the customer education side of the house, even more than they trust the marketing content. So, and you've done this, right? You're like investigating a product and you're like, okay, I've looked at the marketing video. It seems to be like it'll do what I need it to do. Now I'm going to go watch a couple tutorials and see if I have confidence that it actually will do it. And if I actually can make it do that with my skill set, So I think there is a great opportunity there for the whole, that whole customer life cycle for this kind of content to be injected and be useful to people.
So Daniel, have you actually measured sort of the impact of people interacting with your content and how that impacts their conversion rates?
Yeah. So one of the, back to the experimentation topic. One of the sets of experiments that we ran was, well, let me show you first what a banner looks like inside of Snagit, just because it's a little bit vague if you haven't seen it, right? So this is the interface of the product with sort of this toolbar across the top. And then this blue section is, we just call it a banner. We coded in the display of that, but we're using Revenera to power it. Right. So if I want to make a new one of these, I go into Revenera, reach out, I create it as a campaign, put in some XML. That XML gets delivered to the product, and then the product knows how to render that as text and links. So we said, okay, cool. This is a great surface for experimentation. One of the things we wanted to do was set up a cadence for these different jobs to be done. And so we said, well, let's actually do this as a split test. And so I worked with some of our user assistance folks, and we said, let's have a control that's pretty generic. And then let's have a variant track, which is like day 1, day 2, day 3, each day you get another message, and then another variant, and compare those 3 against each other and look for lift. Lift specifically in moving people from trial to paid. So yeah, and that's exciting because it's actually really hard to find many ways to test impact of things like this. A lot of our people who are doing this kind of work have to fly blind a lot of the time. So we did find that in this case, we ran kind of like a time box test. We're like, look, there's the control that did this. Our first variant had a really nice lift. The second variant had less. Let's put the first variant into production. And that's what gets served up to every new user who comes into the trial and says, this is my job to be done. And then we can just let that run and optimize it over time.
And I know that the key metric is conversion, right? Because that's revenue, that's very important. But in terms of if I had a new release coming out, I put a lot of effort into a new functionality, and I'm trying to discern, is it helping with the overall experience? I think it goes back to your first slide in terms of to the value. You could also do it for how much more adoption is now occurring in my product. That would be a percentage lift as well. If it's not just trial, I'm concerned about it.
Yes, and honestly, you can see the impacts everywhere. So like, for example, this is just a sum of the many pieces of content that we have to support the product. And what we found is that you could see lift in usage of that content too, right? So you can look for impact in many areas. People are interacting with the content more. We did some very large scale sort of analysis and found that the more people interacted with this type of helpful content, the more successful they were with the product. So that's also good. Even if you can't make a direct line, for every link in the chain, you can kind of have a big picture view as well.
On your banner, going back to that image of, so I think I certainly like that. It looks like to me that you preserve space. You didn't just throw up a message to the user, right, and take over the screen. Do you keep that banner pretty consistent? So there's a top level message. If you want to go more, you click, but we're not going to force something in front of you at this point.
Yeah, so a couple principles here, and we evolved over time. It was with much trepidation that we ever did the first one of these, I'm telling you, because it is like you don't want to annoy anybody, you don't want to make anybody upset, and so we proceeded really cautiously and listened for any negative feedback. One of the things that we do have is a setting in the product, so you can say, I only want helpful tips, never a promotional tip. And we sort of have categories of like, sometimes it's like, hey, there's a new version out, or here's a webinar about a new whatever. So you can say, no, I don't ever want those. And then you can say, I want to shut them all off. I never want to see any of this. Yeah. We do keep them to this pretty modest space. There is one other type that we do use, which is more of this like pop-up. And so we use that pretty sparingly. Like right now it runs on first launch. And it's really like, let's do this kind of bigger introduction to what's new. And you actually see a lot of products now, desktop products, all the Office suite does this, where they'll pop up something that's like, hey, new in this version. And so I think people are getting pretty accustomed to that. But we make that very video driven, very much about the use case and the value that's in this version. Mm-hmm. And we're doing that both for Snagit and Camtasia now. And that's also powered by Revenera as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the webinar use case. I would think that have you measured the increase in terms of webinar traffic when based on in-product messaging and what that has done for it?
Yeah, we've done some comparison of email versus in-product delivery. And I used to write a lot of emails for TechSmith, and I think email is a great medium. Its death has been predicted a dozen times, and it isn't going to die. So it's useful. And so I just think having more ways to reach people is always good. Email can pull somebody back in who has come disengaged with your product in a way that in-product can't. But on the other hand, in-product can be super timely and like right there when you're in the product and feel very relevant. So we try to use each one as their strengths. And but yeah, the amount of attention, the amount of interaction that you get with some of the in-product is fantastic. It's a great tool to be able to get a message out to people. And again, it's all about, helping your experience be better, helping you to be more successful at what you're doing. So it's really meant to be a win-win. And for anyone who it's not, it's like, there's a way to shut it off, and that's okay too.
Yeah, right.
So Daniel, I think we have time for one more sort of topic area before we have to wrap up. But obviously you've got a lot of learnings. It sounds like you've got a very mature usage analytics program in place. Can you talk a little bit about, what it looked like back in the day when you were first starting out with this and experimentation, and some of the learnings along the way, and maybe some of the results?
Yeah, so even backing up before we were using the reach out and messaging, I think we've talked a lot about that. But some of the initial things when we first got access to the usage data, we're answering basic questions like, like I mentioned, Snagit has these, it's a robust image editor. It also makes simple videos. We often asked ourselves, like, is investing in the video component worth it? Are people using it? How much? We had questions about what they were using it for. Obviously, anonymous usage analytics, and we never collect anything like a URL of what somebody's capturing, right? Like, we don't want that. But there's deductions we can make. If someone's making a lot of 1-minute videos, that's different than if they're making 15 or 30-minute videos. And so when we did dig into that early, we found, wow, it's surprising that there are a lot of 1-minute videos and there's a lot of 60-minute videos. What are those? Oh, webinars are 60 minutes. A lot of people are sort of, using this to capture a meeting or some kind of streamed content that they want to archive for later. So those kinds of insights were really helpful to us very early on to understand the shape and pattern of usage. Also, sometimes you need to retire a feature, or you're having to make a decision. Do we recreate this feature in the new technology or whatever, or do we let it go? And so that can inform those decisions about how many people are using it. And then we've also done surveying to say, if it's a small number using it, let's ask them why and how they're using it, so we at least understand what those use cases are and we don't make decisions blindly.
Yeah, I think the ability to sort of figure out who you're going to ask those survey questions to, you definitely want them to be qualified, and whether that's through, achieving a certain level of usage or focused on a specific area of the product. So that's really interesting. So actually, I just want to thank you, Daniel, because this was awesome. I hope everybody in the audience enjoyed it as much as Vic and I did. We really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And hopefully we'll be doing some more of these with other customers, getting into different use cases for usage analytics, because there's a lot to cover there. If you missed it, which it just happened this morning, we do have our monetization monitor report on software usage analytics 2020 that just came out today. Go to our website or social and you'll see links to that. But highly encourage people to download that and see how your usage of analytics compares to what our survey showed. So with that, thank you again, Daniel. Thank you, Vic. I think this was a really good session, and I will just hand it back to Louise.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, thanks, Daniel. Thank you, Vic, and thank you to everybody who attended today. So just a quick reminder, we will be posting out a copy of this recording within 48 hours. And if you have any questions at all, please contact us using the email addresses that you can see on screen now. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.